9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Oh.
Good evening, everybody.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
The wind blew the outro into the intro and I got messed up. So yeah, we're not finishing. We're not even started.
No,
Sorry about that.
Anyway, good evening and welcome. And we'd like to welcome our guest, Neil Geddes Ward.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. Hello. How are you both?
We're fine, thank
Excellent.
you. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine, actually. Yeah. Getting under the covers from this storm. It seems to be settling here, but I don't know what it's like at the other parts of the country.
Yeah, well, in Leeds, it's settling a bit now. I think it's cold. Cold enough for snow.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's
that next.
Yeah, I'm in Northampton and it's settled quite well here. So it's all
crikey.
good. Yeah. Not like it was this morning or this afternoon. So
No.
So,
anyway, let's have a bit of an intro. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do and what you're into and everything.
Okay. So I just got to clear my throat there. Yeah, well, I'm Neil Geddes Ward and I am an artist. So if you know me on Facebook, you might see some of my artwork lurking around there now and again. And I also got a background working in TV and video production and broadcasting. And I also co-host a paranormal peep show on the Paranormal UK radio network with my co-host Andy Chaplin. We produced a show once a month for that. Similar to yourselves in this kind of broadcast, except it's not live. We pre-record it and we have a guest every month. So that goes out on the Paranormal UK radio network. It also goes out on Spreaker and iTunes and all these other podcasting formats and platforms. And I think we also upload a version to YouTube and maybe some of the other video servers as well. So I'm kept busy. I'm also writing a book as well on the subject that we're going to be talking about tonight. So, yeah, I've got a mixed bag of things under my belt, as it were.
Jolly good. A lot going on there. I've
Keeps
seen
me
your
busy.
artwork. I'm very impressed. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good stuff.
very good.
What got you into the subject of the paranormal then? Did you have your own experience or what started you off?
No. It goes way, way, way back to when I was little. And I grew up watching Star Trek when it first came on the TV. I used to love watching it. I used to love the idea of outer space and could we actually go through outer space. I used to see all the science fiction shows of the 70s like Doctor Who and Space 1999, anything with space in. But then also programs like Ghosts and things like him. And Magnus Magnusson used to come on the TV in the summer holidays and present mysteries, Loch Ness Monster, that kind of stuff. You know, it used to fascinate me. And at one particular point, and I might have been about 8 or 9, 10 years old, I can't remember. I said to my mum, "Where was I before I was born?" And she said, "Well, you never existed." And I thought, well, I must have existed. I just had this weird thing that I must have existed, even though I couldn't remember it.
Yeah.
And that got me really confused. And then as time went on, I grew up a bit more, of course, and people like Doris Stokes came onto the scene, the famous medium at the time, in the mid-70s to early 80s. And I saw things about her on the TV. She was doing her mediumship, talking to the dead. And I read articles in the Reader's Digest magazine about people dying on the operating table. And suddenly they found themselves going out of their body and seeing a light or something, a near-death experience, they call it now. So that kind of got really fascinated. And I went on from there. So it wasn't really any spooky paranormal direct experience. It was just a fascination about this area, and I just wanted to dive in deep and find out more. So as time went on, as I got older, I did have a step uncle who was into spiritualism, and obviously because he knew that by that point I was interested in people like Doris Stokes and we'd read the books and stuff, that he said, "Do you want to come to a spiritualist church?" So I said, "Yeah, okay." I was about sort of 15 or 16 at this point, and so he took me to the local spiritualist church. It wasn't the best demonstration looking back at it, but I was just impressed that someone could appear to be talking to the so-called dead, although I couldn't see or hear anything on that side. They were relaying messages. I don't recall getting a message myself, But then, as I got older, I found out about the College of Psychic Studies and also the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain. I found out about that through the program that was the Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World program.
Yeah, we were talking about that today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, he covered things like life after death and UFOs and, haunted highways, that kind of stuff. And in that particular show, they talked about mediums that demonstrated at the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, because obviously this was before the internet and it really wasn't that well known about. And I thought, wow, that looks a good place. So I tracked it down using 192 direct to inquiries in those days. And you could actually book up for psychic readings. So I jumped on a train with some mates. I was working at this time. I was about 16 or 17. Jumped on a train to London, and all giggling teenagers, we went in there and had a reading. And I was really, really gobsmacked and impressed by the whole thing. So I started buying books that they had in the reception area and started to really get deeply into the whole stuff. And then years later, I ended up joining a psychic developing circle myself, and simply because I was curious, because these people in the readings would say, oh, by the way, you have the ability to do this sort of stuff. And I thought, me? I've never seen a ghost or heard voices. So I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a go. If the opportunity presents itself to join a psychic developing circle, I'll give it a go. And I actually found out, to my amazement, that I was getting results in the readings that I was given with people. So that's a kind of very condensed version of where I went. And gradually, as time's gone on, I've got more and more into the whole thing and expanded my interest into the field of UFOs, faeries, and all sorts of weird stuff.
Yeah. That's good. That's good stuff. I remember going to spiritualist church when I was younger, and I found it very cliquey. It was sort of like every week, Doris, can I come to you? Or Brenda, can I come to you? It was kind of like, if you were new there, you would have had to have gone for a long time. Then I found one that I started the development group with, and psychic awareness, and that was more like a family because it was a really small church. So that was nice, but the bigger ones I think are a little bit cliquey. But yeah. So from there, did you sort of do readings as not like as a profession, but did you do it regularly?
So you'd go along once a week to the psychic developing circle in someone's house, and maybe 5, 6, 7 people, maybe a bit more, depending on how many people they could squeeze into the living room, all sitting around in seats. Yeah. The traditional thing is that you do a meditation initially on a kind of subject, a pathway working thing, like other people call it.
Yeah.
Where someone would give you a guided meditation. But you'd also learn about chakras, which are the energy centers that people are meant to have in their body. And you open those up mentally by imagining like lotus flowers in your mind opening up across your sort of chakra centers. And that supposedly opens up your psychic abilities to tune in more. A bit like tuning your radio a little bit. And from that point on, you then were told to concentrate on a particular person or just give a reading out loud, and if someone could take it, then that was great. And it wasn't straight off the bat that I started to get stuff, but maybe after a few months, I started to think, actually, how could have I got that? And I would start to learn within that scenario about what was spirit, i.e. giving me pictures. I'd have to learn what was my own thoughts and learn what was their thoughts coming in. They would call that clairvoyance, is the typical term, where you would actually see an image in your head and you think, why am I seeing, a blue car or something, whatever that may be. So then you throw it open and say, can anyone take a blue car? Or in some cases, I have then done later on as I got a bit more proficient, I have done readings for people. And I would again see, for instance, a gentleman came to my house. I never knew him, didn't know what he was about. He'd been passed over to me from someone that didn't want to do a reading from because she was a lady and she didn't have gentleman in the house, which was fair enough, So she said, I'll pass you over to Neil. Was that okay? And so he said, yeah. He had recently lost someone in his family. And so I immediately got someone working on a car with a bonnet up, like doing something to the engine. And so I just said, oh, I can see someone working on an engine on a car with you. Don't know what that's about. And he said, yep, I can take that. And apparently it turned out his whole family worked in the car trade business, and they would obviously fix cars up and things and sell them. And then later on in the reading, I got an impression of him with a gentleman out on a lake fishing. And I said, I see you fishing out on the lake. I said, I don't know if you like fishing or not, but this is what I'm seeing. And you'd have to say what you give them, because if you start to judge it, then it would kind of disturb the ripples a little bit. It would disturb the evidence. You'd have to give it as you got it. And even if you don't fully understand it, and this is why mediums sometimes say, look, I don't know what I'm seeing, but this is the kind of scenario I'm getting. It turned out that the guy that I was in contact with, he had passed over, and it was his father. And basically, the reason I was seeing this guy that come to me for the reading and his father on a fishing boat is that the father said, one of the last things he said to him before he passed over, he said, when I get out of the hospital, we'll go fishing together on the lake. And so he was basically saying that back as a last thing. And it got quite an emotional thing, because I also then felt the father's last impressions as he was in the hospital. And when you come back to Earth after passing over, it's quite typically common that the person who's passed over will bring the last sensations of their death back with them, as either a clue to say this is how I died, or it's actually almost a byproduct of coming back. They feel their last earthly sensations. And so typically it might be a pain in the heart if it's a heart attack, or it could be a pain in the abdomen. It could be some sort of cancer or something like that. And I think this chap did die of cancer. But I felt that the guy that had come to me for the reading was actually holding his father's hand in the hospital, and I felt really tearful and emotional. And I said, I feel really tearful and emotional. I can see you holding his hand, and you're by yourself at this point holding his hand. And it's exactly what I had said was exactly as it happened. Apparently, everyone had left him by his father, and it was just him and his dad. And that's where this private word saying, when I get out, I will take you fishing together. Yeah. So no one else had heard it. And I didn't know this guy from Adam, basically.
Yeah. I don't know how people, when they hear stories like that, I don't know how people can doubt spiritualism and, the afterlife and whatever, because there's so many things.
I mean, there was a cracking piece of evidence that I had myself received, because obviously, although I've done readings, I like to go and see mediums myself, which obviously adds to the research I tot up in my book and stuff, which I'm doing. And one of them was a guy, he was about 23 at the time. I suppose he's probably about 27 or 28 now, so it was a few years ago. And he was a medium from the Southampton area, but I'd heard good things about this guy called Ross Bartlett. And someone said that you get a really good medium, one in every 300,000 people. This is supposedly what the spirit world have said. I don't know who they said it to, but that was what conveyed to me. One in every 300,000 is a really, really good medium. And supposedly this guy was the one in 300,000. So I thought, well, I better go and see this guy. So the guy I was currently in a developing circle with, he also arranged for mediums to visit the local spiritualist church. So I said, look, I'd never seen this guy, but I've heard really good things about him. Why don't you book him? So basically he booked him, and he said, do you want tickets? So I said, yes, please. So me and my girlfriend went, and it was a place in Ruislip in Middlesex. I'd never been there before in my life. And so I picked my girlfriend up from the station. We battled through the traffic to get there, the rush hour traffic. And we got there about 15 minutes late, and we found the building. But the trouble was, because I'd seen the building on the internet as an old kind of medieval style building, I thought, that's going to be easy to spot. But when we got there was actually 5 of these buildings all around each other. And you're thinking, oh, crikey, which building is it? So we went in one building after another. We stumbled in on someone's wedding reception. Oh, sorry,
nice.
We're off. We're here to see the dead, not the living. So basically, we went into this last place. Of course, it's always the last place. We went, we could see a door open. And we saw a man sitting there with a white shirt who was taking the money as you came through the door. But by this time, this demonstration with Ross Bartlett had already started. So I thought, oh, God, we've missed it, or we're going to miss some of it. How embarrassing. So we got there, and the man in the white shirt said, go through, find some seats, and I'll collect the money from you, at the end. So we said, fine, okay. So we kind of shuffled in, all embarrassed in front of everyone, and I could see this Ross Bartlett talking to a lady, and someone indicated some seats. So we kind of sat down, and we were to the side of him, literally sat down, got our coats off, just sat there. And then he turned to me and says, I'd now like to come to the gentleman on my left. I thought, oh my God, that's me. I've literally just sat down. How bloody cheeky of me. So because I've got a digital audio recorder, which I always take to these things, right? And I quickly slammed it into record. So I got the whole thing on recording if anyone ever wants to hear it, because it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
So basically, he was bringing through this lady, and he gave her a name of something like Agnes, and he said, "Can you take the name?" And I can't remember the name he gave, because this is not a name known to me and my family. You see, he says, "Can you take the name Agnes?" And I said, "Oh no, sorry, I don't know her." And she was talking, and basically said, "She's talking about your daughter Morgan." And I sat up then, because my daughter is called Morgan. And I thought, oh my God, he's got my daughter's name right. So anyway, he was talking about that, and she says, "Oh, Agnes likes children, blah, blah, blah." But I still couldn't understand who Agnes was. And then she said something. She said, "Your brother, do you have a brother called Phil?" And I went, "Yeah," which was absolutely right. And she says, "Phil likes to go and visit graves, and he's taken a picture of my grave." And he was actually confident enough to say, "Can you ring your brother now, like in the demonstration?" And I had to say, "Oh, I don't know if that's possible," because I didn't actually have his number in my phone, because I'd got new phones and I hadn't actually got, so I couldn't do it. But I was aware that my brother did go around tracking people's families' gravestones and things like that. But then this was the cracker bit that came up. He said, "Do you see that man over there with the white shirt?" And he was actually pointing to the guy that was on the door that waved me through. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, his name is Chris Hayes." And it turned out to be that this was the guy that drove Ross Bartlett about and helped him organise his gigs. He was an old elderly gentleman. He was like a surrogate father figure to him, I understood. But he said his name is Chris Hayes. And when he said the name Chris Hayes, I gulped, and I thought, oh my God. Because he said, "Agnes is telling me that Morgan, my daughter, is also connected to a Chris Hayes." And I said, "You're absolutely right. My daughter is going out with a guy called Chris Hayes." And I thought, how bloody strange is that? Because there's a guy that happens to be called Chris Hayes there. And they're connecting me up to my daughter, which was true. She was going out with a guy called Chris Hayes. And I thought, what is the odds of that? So, like Deborah saying about the evidence, how can you be accused of making it up, or body language reading, that was something that you could not make up. And remember, I'd come in late. I'd sat on these chairs. I had not booked the tickets myself. They were done not in my name. They were literally done in another guy's name. And I was the guy that turned up late. And the evidence just kept rolling out, factual stuff, bits after bit. He got my Welsh grandfather then started talking about my artwork and stuff, It was just absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I'll send you guys the recording later on so you can listen to it yourself. I'm saying the name. Now, the name Agnes, which I said I couldn't take, I'm actually making that name up right now, because I can't even remember the name that he gave me during the reading. This is why it's something that I didn't know. So after this, I went back to my mum, who was still around. She's actually passed on herself now. And I said to her, "Who is Agnes?" And I played her the video, the audio recording. And she goes, I don't know who that name is. So anyway, she happened to be then speaking to my dad's sister on the phone a day or two later. And she said, "Neil went for this reading and this person called Agnes came through. Do you know who she is?" And my Auntie Sue said, "Oh my God, yeah, that's your Auntie Doris." Now, I knew who Auntie Doris was, but apparently her real name was Agnes. And I didn't know that. But we all called her Auntie Doris, you see. And so she never had children herself, so she used to love us kids, and of course she liked my children. After that, she had an attraction for my children. She loved my kids, and so this is why she seemed to know so much about my daughter and her boyfriend and stuff, and the fact, just absolutely cracking evidence. So you find some of this out afterwards, and you have to go and check. And so this is why the accusation of mind reading can't be put into place, because I didn't know myself. You see,
You can cold read. You can cold read to an extent, but when they get into the nitty gritty like that, and it turns out later on that was somebody that you were related to, it's just that you didn't know that at the time you were asked. You know, that's it. Just it's amazing.
Can I just quickly jump in on that? I went to one a few years ago. I went to one a few years ago. They told me about somebody, and then I asked this person, I didn't even know who this other person was, what they was wearing and what happened to them, and it was absolutely spot on. And I didn't even know this person existed before I went seeing this medium.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it up. You could not make it up.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you got the people like Darren Brown, and there's a few other sort of famous kind of magicians on stage, and who was the guy that died? James Randi, who was the magician that accused Uri Geller of being a fake and things like that, which is a whole story in itself. But yeah, I mean, these people, they just go with that cold reading idea and say this is how they do it, blah blah blah. And I've had arguments with people over the internet saying, "Oh, but you know, they check your profile out on the internet." And this guy was debating me because I actually had a debate with a guy on YouTube. I saw some video where it was mediums being accused of fraudulency and stuff like that. And I put a few comments saying, well, some might be, but not all of them. And this guy came back at me with his comments saying, no, they're all fakes, they're all frauds, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he's basically sort of, you know, it's like saying all builders are dodgy. They're all builders. But I'm thinking, if all builders are dodgy, how can you explain the house you're living in is structurally sound, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there are dodgy builders. There will be a few walls that will fall down. But there are houses and skyscrapers that are still standing, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
So that analogy is that there are dodgy mediums or ones that just aren't very good, but there's also some really cracking ones, and this is the ones that I tend to focus on. So the only thing I know about cold reading is when I put my coat on, really, because I'm, you know, and that's when spirits show up because they tend to make the room cold, don't they? But basically, this guy on the internet, on YouTube, that was coming back to me. We started emailing each other, basically, a debate over the internet, if you like, you know. And he was saying, look, I've just gone on to your webpage, LinkedIn or something like that, you know, and I've come back, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, you work for the BBC. And I said, well, actually, you're wrong. Because if you look at my LinkedIn, you really look at it. I don't work for the BBC. I said, yes, I've worked in broadcasting, but I have never, ever worked for the BBC. Yeah. And I said, plus the fact, in all these readings I've had, they've never brought any of that up. They've always talked about artwork or something like that. They've never, ever brought up, oh, you work with the BBC. No, they've never brought it up. So I said, that's an absolutely weak argument you got there. It's fallen over that argument as far as I'm concerned. But these people, they stick to their guns and they won't be open-minded about it. That's the problem, you see.
Yeah. That's the thing. I think as well, a lot of it is people, if it's something they don't know about or the unknown, they're scared of it rather than looking into it. They'll just think, no, don't want to know.
Well, I will tell you some interesting points about people being scared of it and they duck their head in the sand over it. I'll get to one really interesting story, but I know you want to talk a little bit about fairies and stuff like that. So rather than me just talk about my own personal things, I'll tell you a few interesting stories to do with weird stuff and fairies and whatnot. I'll tell you this story first of all, which is still on the kind of spiritualism kind of subject. As a point of mediumship and whatnot, because I was doing readings back in the 90s, and part of my kind of learning was obviously tarot cards. A lot of people go into that, and so for a few years I was doing tarot cards, and people were coming around for readings at my house, and I was giving them a reading. They were all really happy with it, but I was finding actually as I was doing the tarot card readings, I was starting to launch into mediumship. It was almost like a stepping stone upwards, which was interesting. But that's not the case point we're going to discuss about that. But the thing was that I did get a phone call from this elderly lady saying, look, I don't drive. Can you come to me for a reading, to do the reading?
Yeah.
Now, she lived about sort of 10 miles away, something like that. So I kind of gone, all right, okay. Yeah. So I drove there and I found a place. And this was in, you know, the 90s. There, we never had the internet in the early 90s. I had to find her using this traditional map, no sat nav in the car in those days. Found her place. She lived in a little old bungalow. Knocked on the door, went in, and I said, right, I'll do this reading. And I did the reading about 30, 40 minutes, something like that. And at the end of it, she said, that's very good. That's very interesting. It's all very accurate. I said, oh, great. She goes, but there's one thing you didn't tell me. And I said, well, what's that? And she said, well, you never mentioned my husband. So I said, well, look, if your husband was around, I definitely would have felt him. and I would have mentioned
Yeah.
it, but I said I haven't felt them around. So she says, well, let me tell you this. She says, in this bedroom, and she showed me the bedroom because it was in a bungalow. She says, in this bedroom here, my husband spent the last year of his life ill in that bed. And he was so ill that he had to have one of these oxygen tanks to breathe with because he was so poorly. And she goes, every day she used to straighten up his pillows, lean him forward, puff up his pillows for him, and then lay him back down on the bed. Well, on this particular day, she said she leant him forward to puff up his pillows, make him more comfortable. And he just kept saying, I feel so ill. I feel so ill. I want to die. And she said, with that, he just literally died in her arms and collapsed.
Jeez.
And so she put him back onto the bed as, he died. And she said she saw this vaporous mist come out of his chest. And she said she saw it go up and across the room, and then it went into the airing cupboard in the corner of the room.
Right.
And she said, now, I told my doctor this, and he just laughed at me. But she goes, I know you won't laugh. She said 6 months later, I woke up in the middle of the night, and out of that same airing cupboard, I saw, and this was her words, because she was a lady of the 90s, an elderly lady of the 90s. Today, we call them a different word. But she said, I saw a red Indian coming out the cupboard. Now, we say Native American or whatever these days, don't we? But she says, I saw a red Indian coming out the cupboard. She said he had the full feathered headdress. She had war paint across his face. She had like a bone necklace going around his neck. And he was bare-chested. And he was doing this, like clawing his way out the cupboard. But she could only see him from the waist upwards. Now, behind him, she said she saw another man in the shadows, and then behind him she said she thought she saw another man, possibly with some sort of hat on, like a bowler hat, but he was in the pretty much the shadows as well. But she said she could clearly see this red Indian coming out of the cupboard, as she described him. And she said that it wasn't just a one-off, it was happening every single night. So she told her doctor, because what else did she do? She knew nothing of spiritualism. She knew nothing of spirit guides, anything. And yet she said, I saw this. I don't know what to do. So she says, doctor, I keep seeing this red Indian coming out of my cupboard. And he just laughed at her. Now, she said, I know you won't laugh. So she told me that. Now, part of me did want to laugh because around that time, there was a film that had literally just come out in the cinema called The Indian in the Cupboard. So I was trying to button my lip and not laugh because I thought, oh God, the irony of what she's saying. But at the same time, it was very interesting what she said. So she goes, what do you think's happening? And so I basically said, well, have you heard of spirit guides? And she goes, well, no. So basically, I sort of explained to her, I said, well, I said the mist that you saw coming out of your husband's body, I think was his spirit or soul, if you like.
Yeah.
And I said, he went over into that cupboard there. And I said, and that cupboard, I think is acting like a revolving doorway that you might get in a building like a hotel. You know, you can go in it, but you can also come out of it. And I said, I think your husband probably thought all this kind of stuff was a load of rubbish, you know, all this spiritual stuff. And she goes, yeah, he absolutely thought it was terrible, you know, complete load of baloney. I said, that's part of the key. I said, because of that, he hasn't got the understanding or the ability to come back perhaps by himself. So I said, he's using what they call a spirit guide on the other side to be effectively like a taxi driver or a bus driver to bring him back.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my phone's just pinged off about 20 times. Isn't that weird? Did you hear it? I think, oh my God, it's the spirit world. They want to message me.
That revolving door.
Yeah. And so basically this spirit guide, I surmise, was possibly bringing her husband back to him, and that's who the guy was in the shadows behind him. But I explained to her, I said that, you know, typically Native Americans are very much more spiritual people. They're much more advanced than us people that are typically very materialistic here, where they kind of work with nature and that kind of stuff. And they typically show up in seance rooms in the world of spiritualism. And I mean, you can get monks and Chinamen and people like that and nuns and things like that. But it's very common to have Native American Indians, running circles and seances. They act as doorkeepers and guardians, if you like, and they kind of control the proceedings from their side of the veil, if you like.
Yeah.
And so I said, I think that spirit guide was trying to bring your husband back. So she goes, well, what do I do about it? I said, well, ask it something. What do you want? You know, I said, if you get no joy, try and call the College of Psychic Studies in London or the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, because I said they're the people that can best advise you. And I said, just call 192 direct inquiries and tell them what you told me, and then take it from there, and they can advise you maybe further. And so that's what she said she would do. And then I said, cheerio. And that was it. I never saw her again. But I remember getting in my car and thinking, oh, my God, I don't want to look in the mirror. But this is spooky. I might see someone sitting in the back of the car or something, you know. But all the same, it was very, very interesting. Now, moving on from that, we said about people that don't want to face this kind of thing. They just duck their head in the sand, which, Deborah, I think you said. That reminded me of a guy that I once knew. And I did work with him at a broadcasting company. And he was a security guard. And what happened was I was working on an evening shift, I think it was, and they had a kitchen in there, kitchen area. And he was from the West Indies. And he would obviously chat to me as I go through the building. We'd have a little chat about stuff and, you know, see you later, kind of what have you. But anyway, I overheard him talking to a girl that worked there. And all I heard him say was, she was white as that fridge freezer. And he pointed to this fridge in the kitchen. And I thought, ooh, this sounds spooky. I'm going to butt into this conversation. What's going on here? I said, what are you talking about? You know, he says, what, who was as white as a fridge freezer? He goes, this woman. And I said, a woman? And he says, yeah, this woman. I saw her sitting on a church. I went, what? And I said, yeah, I saw her sitting on the church. I thought, what do you mean? And he said, well, he said, where I lived in, you know, wherever it was, St. Lucia or whatever these Barbados Islands, whatever Caribbean islands might be. He said he was coming out of a bar one night with his buddy. So we have a witness, which is important.
Yeah.
Now, of course, people are going to say, oh, but he was drunk. He was coming out of a bar. But actually, I looked into the effects of alcohol. With alcohol, you don't actually hallucinate. People will say, oh, you must have been drinking. You don't actually hallucinate visual things. That's more to do with drugs that you might get, medicines and stuff. You sometimes can have auditory hallucinations with alcohol. I found out with studies. You know, you might hear someone say your name or something like that when you're drunk, but you don't get visual hallucinations, apparently. So I think you've got to rule any of that out. But besides, he did have a witness. So basically, he was walking back from the bar, and they took the normal route back to their houses, and they walked up this hill. And as they come up the hill, they come up towards where the church was. And he said, up on the church, we saw this woman sitting on this church roof, and she was as white as a fridge freezer. And I laughed. I said, what's a woman doing sitting on the church roof? And he said, she was no ordinary woman. He said, this woman was at least 50 foot tall. Yeah, I can see your faces. I like that, you know. It's like, what? Exactly. What? So if you imagine sitting on a doll's house, you know, standing in a doll's house, both your feet either side, I'd imagine that's something what he saw. She had long white hair, long white gown, completely pale white face, and she was sat on the roof of this church. Now, there's one absolute fact here that we can't ignore. This explains why they're always trying to raise money for church roofs.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Because they end up with all these giant women sitting.
Yeah, 50-foot giants.
So basically,
women.
so basically, he kind of like, they both went, oh my God, when they saw this 50-foot big giant lady sitting on the church roof. His mate hid behind a gravestone. So Owen, the guy that I'm talking about, he said, you see this too? And he goes, yeah, I see it. So they both saw this woman at the same time, which, as I said, rules out the idea of hallucinations. Yeah. So Owen, the guy that I knew, being the brave of the two, he said he picked up a great big rock or a stone, and he thought he'd throw it at this great big 50-foot giant, which I don't think is advisable, to be honest.
No.
But he did it.
Is that all it's going to do?
Yeah, exactly. So I said, well, what happened? He said it went straight through her, like as if she wasn't solid. But then she stood up. So I thought, oh, he's pissed her off. And she stood over the church roof and started to walk towards them. And
Right.
he said with that, she shrunk down in size and then just faded into the ground. And that's it. She was
Wow.
gone. So he said, but I don't believe in ghosts and ghoulies and things that go bump in the night. I said, but you just saw this 50-foot woman, you know, and then she
Yeah, what would
faded
you
into the
attribute
ground.
that to?
Yeah, and so I said, well, you know, what happened? And then he went on to say another ghostly story. He said that when he finally sort of emigrated to Britain, he said he was driving down this particular road one night, and he said, you know, like I talked about looking in the rear view mirror, he said he looked in his rear view mirror and saw a woman sitting in the back seat of his car. And he completely freaked out. And without sort of realizing it, he put his foot on the accelerator and got frightened, you see. And he was driving fast down this road. And of course, the police pulled him over, you know, Nick, that kind of stuff. And they said, you know, we're pulling you over, you're speeding. And he said, I'm really sorry, officer, but you're not going to believe this. I saw this woman sit in the back seat of my car. And he said, as soon as he told them that, they went, oh, that's okay. You can go then. He said it's almost as if they'd heard this story before on that stretch of road.
Yeah.
And like other people had reported it. But he was still in denial about it because he said, I don't believe in these things. I don't believe in these things. And he was actually sticking his head in the sand because he didn't want to face that reality. And I think that he was possibly, without realizing it, very, very psychic, possibly like our old lady that saw the Indian coming out of the cupboard. I think she was probably a natural medium without realizing it.
Yeah,
and what I forgot to mention about that is that this revolving doorway was, I believe, I explained to him, was a portal. I believe it's a portal. And I said that, you know, with these things that my own kind of research suggests that in the world of mediumship, especially in a seance room, you get like these cabinets, which a medium will sit in. And they'll have curtains drawn down around them. And the medium will sit in it. And they're normally taped up to a chair and blindfolded or taped up on that. That's to allegedly prevent fraud. And what will happen, a spirit will manifest in ectoplasm, which is a substance we all have in our bodies, but predominantly comes out of the medium, normally out their nostrils or eyes or mouth or something, and it forms into a solid person inside of this cabinet. And I did ask a medium once, I said, well, why do you have this cabinet? He said, it helps contain the energy. So with that in mind, I kind of thought about it, and lots of spirits I've noticed are seen standing in doorways. And I think what they're doing, they're using the natural structure of a door or a house to build up their image, even if it's a temporary image. And so the analogy I use to explain to people about these manifested spirits that come out of these seance cabinets is that when you go to bake a cake, for instance, you might have a cake mixture and you put it in the tin and it's a liquid state. But then you put it in the oven, you whack up the temperature to 200 degrees, you shut the door and you leave it there for like 20, 30 minutes. And then you take it out, it's gone into a solid. If you left that door open, all that heat, that thermal energy will escape into the kitchen and it won't be enough to kind of transform that liquid into solid matter. So you shut the door to contain that heat.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so in an analogy is that you have this energy bouncing around in this seance cabinet, which then concentrates this ectoplasm and helps it build up. Now, other people have quite rightly suggested it could be to prevent people from seeing the form being formed into a human person. And it could be quite disturbing. If you think back to the John Carpenter's film, The Thing, where you got that creature morphing out of a dog into a person, and it looks like pretty gory stuff. It could be something like that. You're seeing this form coming out, slowly taking the shape of a person. It could be quite disturbing, you know, to see. So someone suggested that maybe they do that as well, so that you don't have to see it, because what happens is the curtain opens and out comes your great uncle, whoever, or someone manifests there for someone in the crowd or something, and they walk around and they shake hands and stuff like that. And after maybe 10 minutes, they go back and disappear. So that's called physical mediumship. But I'll get onto a few stories about the faeries, which I mentioned earlier. Back in about 2004, I co-wrote and illustrated a book called Fairycraft, which was working with fairies and stuff. And it was my ex-wife's sort of instigation. She was really into the fairies. And so I kind of learned a lot about it through doing this book, really, with her. And I was merely the illustrator, but I kind of did some additional research. And one of the bits we researched was a film that we found on DVD at the time. And I believe it is on YouTube. And so your listeners and viewers can perhaps track it down. It's a film called The Fairy Faith. And if you think of fairy spelled as in fairy, like fairy washing up liquid,
Yeah.
I spell it myself as Faerie, the old English way of spelling
old
fairy.
English, yeah.
But in this film, it's called The Fairy Faith, and it's this Canadian filmmaker called John Walker, and he basically has gone round and interviewed people that believe they've had fairy type of encounters.
Right.
And he met this lady in, I think it was Nova Scotia she lived in, and I can't remember her name, but she is on Facebook because I actually tracked her name down and sort of thought, should I message her and ask her a few questions? I thought, no, I'll leave her be. I think she's told the story enough on the video. I don't need to ask her any more questions. But she's still out there. And basically, she told the story of where she went. She used to take her kids, probably in the 70s, I'd imagine, given her age and the age of her daughter, that she used to take her kids to this lake. And I'm thinking it could be Lake Ontario, but I don't know which particular lake it was in Canada.
Yeah.
But she used to take her kids to a picnic by her favourite lake. And they used to have a picnic. And after the picnic, it was traditional that all the kids would paddle around. I'm just going to turn that down. My phone is going away.
I was just getting into the rhythm.
That is.
I know, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to put the old notification thing that stops that. There we go. Is that going to work? Yeah, enable. There we go. I'm a member of a group, and lots of messages start to come in for members of the group, and that's what's happening, I think. So apologies for that. But anyway, getting back to this lady in Nova Scotia, she used to take her kids to this picnic, and they used to paddle in the lake afterwards. And I think she had about 3 children at the time. So anyway, she said she was paddling with the children in this lake, but she said she heard this really weird music or singing coming from somewhere, and she didn't know where it was coming from because they were all alone. But she said, I didn't like the feeling that this music gave me. And she said that she instinctively felt that she's got to get out of there. So she said to her kids, let's get out of here. Come on, let's go back to the car and go. And the kids, obviously, they're paddling. They said, well, why? And she said she got a bit ratty with them, said, let's go now, get in the car. And she got all her kids in the car. Now, in this film, they took this lady and her now grown-up daughter back to that location of where this occurrence happened. So they were shown, this is where it happened. And the daughter then carried on the story. And she goes, I remember being told to get back in the car. And I remember my mum saying, don't look out the window. Don't look out the window. Right. She goes, but of course, that meant that I was going to look out the window because I wanted to see what I wasn't meant to look at. So she said she looked out the window, and she said she saw this path, and she sort of showed you where the path was on the film. She said she saw these small beings, about a foot high, all coming out holding hands, skipping and dancing like in a circle, like Ring a Roses type of thing. And they were skipping and dancing, coming down this pathway towards it. And this is where this weird singing music was coming from. It was them. Right. But they were coming towards the car as they drove off. And she says, I remember seeing them. And that was presumably some sort of fairy beings. And the mother instinct took over to say, get out of there. Because I don't know whether the mother's instinct kicked in or she had heard something about fairies in the past, about saying you can get enchanted by them and weird stuff can happen. So she says she got out of there, which I thought was quite a spooky little story, actually. Yeah. And I don't think they ever went back there again until this John Walker said, let's go back and presumably film in this location some 30 plus years later. So anyway, that was that story. And then I had another interesting story in this film called The Fairy Faith. And this was a guy called, I think it's Steve Odell, his name was. And he was actually a Glaswegian construction worker. So he was from Glasgow, very basic, down-to-earth guy. But he'd gone on holiday to Ireland. And he was actually sort of walking around these hills there. And the hill he was walking around was actually called the Fairy Hill. And he said he, too, heard some weird music coming from somewhere. But he couldn't place where it was coming from. And he thought, where's that music coming from? But then he said it had just stopped raining and the clouds were parting ahead of him and the sun was coming out and it's forming a lovely rainbow over the valley. And he thought, oh, what a lovely view that is. And he was just looking at the view, really enchanted by the view that he could see. But he said that whilst he was looking at this view with the sun and the rainbow and everything, thinking how lovely it looks, he said there was something in his peripheral vision. He could see some movement down there somewhere. So he thought, what is that movement? And he looked down and he said he saw this woman. And I'm not exactly sure how high it was. She could have been about a foot high. She could have been a bit taller. I'm not exactly sure now. But he said she had brown, leathery looking skin, and she had a kind of pointy hat that was also brown and leathery. And she said she appeared to be holding what looked like old style sheep shears, like a big old pair of scissors.
Yeah.
She was cutting around the sole of his shoe. I presume he might have been sitting down at this point, but I'm not 100% certain. But she appeared to be cutting around the sole of his shoe. And he said where his shadow extended on the ground, where the head of his shadow was, there was the male equivalent of this being, like the husband, if you like, of this woman. Similar looking, but he could clearly define its whiskers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In fact, I think he might have said the woman even had whiskers, actually, thinking about it, but I might be wrong on that.
It's not unusual.
We know what kind of people we're dealing with. So he said that where his shadow extended, he said that this male being was rolling up his shadow like paper, literally like paper, like a roll of paper. How can you roll up a shadow? I mean, and he was just totally... Yeah, crazy. And he was totally gobsmacked, of course, as you expect, and thinking, So he said the only thing I could think of saying was "oi," like that, like you might shout at some kids that are naughty,
telling them
"oi." Yeah, and they kind of looked at each other as if say he can see us, and he said they went and just vanished.
Yeah.
And he said, I dread to think what would have happened to me had I not spotted them. What were they doing with my shadow, and how can they remove it? And someone suggested maybe they were taking part of his soul or something, but it was visually shown as a shadow. I mean, people say, well, how can you take a shadow? Go on. Yeah.
I just thought Peter Pan, when you started saying about rolling your shadow up.
Yeah. People exactly said that. They said they think of Peter Pan. Yeah.
Straight away.
That's weird.
It could be that J.M. Barrie might have been smoking the same weed,
Possibly.
So, but it defies physics. I mean, it defies physics because when you have a shadow, it's because the sun isn't reaching the ground or something, isn't it? And so there's less light. So you can't physically roll up a shadow. But like you say, it's like Peter Pan, and but I mean, the whole thing of them vanishing defies physics. These people came from somewhere, and he was actually at this place called the Fairy Fort. So it obviously got a bit of a reputation, this place in Ireland. You see. And he wasn't some pot smoking hippie. When you watch the film, he seemed a quite down to earth sort of guy. He was a construction worker and stuff. And again, talking of down to earth guys, the stories get even stranger. I mean, this is a person that I personally met. I got on an EasyJet plane a number of years ago. My son was very little then; he was about 5 at the time, 4 or 5, maybe 6, and we were all out heading out to Spain. And at the time, I lived in the Orkney Islands off the coast of Scotland, and I ran this fairy museum with my ex-wife, and that consisted of my paintings and some legends that we sort of put on display, and people would come around and look at the artwork and read the legends and buy a few cards and prints and things and books, which we'd obviously brought out the Fairycraft book at that point. And so we're taking a break from that. We're heading to Spain, and we just got on at Luton Airport, our connecting flight from Scotland to Luton Airport in London. And there were a lot of Spanish people getting on the plane because obviously they were heading back to Spain, and so they're catching this flight too. Now, the very last guy to get on was a dark-skinned guy who I also assumed to be Spanish, but it turned out that when we started chatting, he said, "No, I'm from Iran." He said, "I prefer to call it Persia, but you wouldn't Iran." I said, "Oh, right." So I said, "Are you going on holiday then?" And he goes, "No." He said, "I live in London." He said, "And I'm an architect, but I live in London, but I'm going out to Spain to check on the properties that he's designed to make sure they're all being constructed. He's overseeing the project, etc., etc." So I said, "Oh, right. Okay." So he said, "What do you do?" So I said, "Well, I do artwork. I'm an artist. I've got this gallery in the Orkney Islands." And I showed him some photographs on my camera of the artwork I did. And so this prompted a bit of a discussion. So I told him the story that I just told you about the shadow being rolled up and the thing being cut from his feet by the little being. And I told him that. I said, "Oh, there's this film I've seen, really weird." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I think science is just getting its handle on the door of this reality. We're not quite there yet, but we're just getting our hand on the door handle before we open it up and find out that there's something beyond, sort of thing. And we went into this thing, and then because I think he kind of felt that he could trust me because we were having this bit of an intimate, weird conversation, he told me a story, which I doubt very much he's told many people at all. He might have told his wife or kids maybe, but he's probably not told the world at large. Yeah. And he said that when he was in Iran, he said he was conscripted into the army, and I would put him at that age, maybe late teens, early 20s, something like that. So I'd put this roughly in the early 1980s, roughly. Could have been a bit later, earlier, maybe late 70s. I don't know. But he said he was in the army out there, and he was patrolling the streets of Iran with an army buddy on the night shift. And they were going around with their guns on the night shift. And a sandstorm had kicked up, which was obviously very common out there. You know, we've just had a storm here with the rain, but out there, when you get a storm, it's sand blown everywhere. Yeah. So he said they sought shelter, and they found a mosque. And so they went into the mosque, and they said, we'll spend the night here until the sandstorm dies down. Now, it's customary when you go to mosque to take your shoes and socks off. It's just the way they do things out there. So he took their shoes and socks off, and he said to his mate, he said, now you go to sleep for an hour, and I'll call this guy that I spoke to, I'll call him Hussein, okay? Because I don't know, I can't remember his name, but I'll call him Hussein. I don't know what even his surname is. It might be Saddam. I don't know. But he said to his mate, "You go to sleep, and I'll keep an eye on things." So he sat there with a gun, with his back against the wall, with his feet out, sitting next to his mate who'd gone to sleep. And he said, no matter how hard he tried, he said, I kept falling asleep. He said, my eyes kept shut and I kept drifting off. I was so tired. And he said, he woke up and he goes, oh, I must stay awake. I must stay awake. And then he'd drift off asleep again. And he said he drifted off for the third time asleep. And he said, I must stay awake. And he woke himself up somehow. And he said, at this point, when he woke himself up, he said he noticed a woman was crouching down at his feet, looking down, staring at his feet. And next to this woman was a young girl who he thought to be about 11 or 12 years of age, looking at his friend's feet. And he thought, where the hell did they come from? I didn't see them come in. And he thought, who are they? And they just kept staring at the feet of him and his buddy. Yeah. So he said he didn't like it. So he said that he started to wrap the strap of his gun around his arm carefully. Oh, yeah. Before that, he said he tried to wake his friend up by pressing his elbow on his friend's chest to try and wake his friend up discreetly without alerting the people. Discreetly, wake up. But his friend wouldn't wake up. So he said he started to get the strap of the gun to wrap around his arm. He said, so the gun wouldn't swing as he ran away. Now, I'm thinking, you're the guy that's going to run away, but you got the gun, you know. I didn't understand that bit. But this is what he said. And he said it must have been the movement of doing this, wrapping the strap around his arm, that picked up this lady's attention. He said that the lady suddenly looked up at him and stared him in the eye. And he said, as soon as I stared at her in the eyes and I looked at her, we both looked at each other. He said, I just knew. He said, I just knew without a shadow of a doubt. Some inner knowing kicked in. I said, I knew that she was not from this world. I just knew as soon as I made eye contact with her. And then he said, at that point, the lady stood up and the young girl stood up. And he said, they turned and walked away. But he said, as they turned and walked away, he noticed that they both had cloven hooved feet. And they walked away and vanished into the wall of the mosque. That's creepy. And when he told me that, the hairs went up and down on my neck. I was thinking, oh my God.
I've got goosebumps now.
Me too,
Yeah. But then you think about it, this is why they were staring at his feet, because to them, their human feet were the odd thing. You see?
Yeah.
They had thought, what the bloody hell these people got? Look at these 5 little wiggly pink things, you know?
Look at these Cornish pasties.
Yeah, where do they go and get their shoes from? So basically, then also you start to think about it, and you're thinking, hang on, it sounds like Pan, you know, with the cloven hooved people, half man, half beast. Maybe that's where these weird legends of half man, half beast with cloven hooved feet come from. We call him the devil or Pan or fauns or centaurs or whatever like that. But this is where perhaps they come from. And it's interesting that I mentioned earlier, we had the lady that's sitting on the church, which was a Christian church, a religious building. And in this building, which is a mosque, but also additionally a religious building, that we got this other worldly beings coming in there. So is it something about these religious buildings with prayer, chanting, whatever, meditation, builds up kind of energies, portals? We mentioned portals earlier along, and they're box-like structures, so almost like a seance structure, but maybe a bigger version of it, that these beings can come through portals that are being created somehow within the structure of these buildings, or however this lady ended up on the roof, I don't know. But some weird stuff there, fairy stuff.
Definitely.
Wow, that is amazing.
Do you take reports from people about fairy sightings then?
Well, I have done in the more latter years, because what happens is that I found that when I do talks, I did a talk, for instance, at the Probe conference up at Lither St Anne's a couple of years ago, on this subject. And of course, as soon as you do the talk and you stop and you go back to your table or wherever you're sitting, you get a whole queue of people queuing up to talk to you, and they want to tell you their experience because they need to share it with someone that can understand them, you see.
Exactly.
And this is why I think this is why Hussein wanted to open up to me, because he got it off his chest. And because I was talking about the weird stuff, he felt that he could tell someone in confidence. And I actually said, can I use this story in a book? But I will protect your identity. He said, yes, as long as that would be the case, that then he was happy for that to happen. So one particular lady came up to me after the Probe conference, and I'd mentioned this story of the cloven-hoofed lady and the girl with a cloven hoof walking out the wall of the mosque. And she said, I'm so glad you told me that story, because I thought I was going mad. And I said, well, what happened to you then? She says, well, a number of years ago, I unfortunately gave birth to a stillborn baby. And it was a very difficult emotional time for me. And the maternity people in the hospital wing put me in this room by myself with the dead body of the baby in a cot. And the idea is that I was to sit there and try and come to terms with it. And obviously, it's a very tragic moment in her life. And she just said she sat there with her head in her hands thinking, how can I be strong for my husband and my family when I've just given birth to this dead baby? And she sat there with her head in her hands like that. And she said she don't know exactly where they came from, but she thinks they must have come through the door. She said that suddenly in the room came 4 or 5 small centaur beings, about a foot high. And she said they weren't pretty at all. They were really ugly faces. So they kind of had a human face, I'm gathering, but they were probably more. You're probably seeing more on the Undateables than Miss World or something. You know? So, I'm not being politically correct, maybe, I don't know. No. But anyway, so basically, she said 2 of them stared at the corpse of the baby in the cot, and 2 of them stared at her. And she said that it had some sort of weird effect on her. It went from being really despondent and emotionally broken to somehow then being changed. And she felt a transformation psychologically, emotionally, in some way, that she's felt that she's somehow got this inner strength to carry on. It's almost as if the presence of these beings, whatever they were, gave her this healing in some way. And why they came in the form they did, with they were centaurs. That's all she could say. They had a body of a horse or something like that, with the top half of a human. And again, we have these in legends, and we think of Ray Harryhausen movies or something like that, animation movies. But these beings that seem to exist in some way or form. I mean, maybe you could argue, a skeptic would say, oh, that's the effects of the drugs they gave her and she was hallucinating. But then you've got to say, well, whatever it was, it had some transformational effect on her to her benefit. Yeah. She said it actually helped her. And the thing is that this was a number of years ago. It's not as if she kind of thought about, oh, well, that was just a dream, or, oh, yeah, I thought about it and it was the drugs. She still clinged on to this idea that she had actually seen them, in the same way that Hussein clinged on to the idea that he saw these beings in the mosque. He could have thought, oh, maybe I dreamt it. But that was like 45 years ago or whatever. But he still believed it happened, you see. Yeah. So... yeah, people do come and tell me their stories, and that was one such particular story, and they're just totally bizarre, aren't they? Absolutely
it's amazing,
bizarre.
though.
Feel free to ask me questions.
We will. We're going to go for a break, for 2-minute break. When we come back, we shall ask you. We've got some questions lined up for you, so we'll ask you those then.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go
get another top up. Yeah.
Refreshment.
I shall get another cup of tea.
Yeah, go have a top up.
Yeah, I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Your 2
See you
minutes
guys
starts
out.
now.
All right, I shall get my cup of tea. Thank you.
And we're back.
We're back in the room.
Right.
Perfect
Now,
timing.
I have an
now
issue.
that's
I won't
perfect
be a
time.
minute.
It's question time. So, anyone's got any questions? We've already got a few come through. I've got a couple. Debs has got a couple. So, do you want to start? Can I ask you one question first? And then we'll go into the viewers. So,
Sure.
this is what it's been. I've been meaning to ask a few different people, and I keep forgetting to write it down. But going back to spirits and ghosts, what do you think happens to entities that are seen to haunt a specific building or place once that has been knocked down, demolished, or rebuilt on? Now, the reason I'm asking is there's a pub near me, and apparently there's been sightings of a young girl and an older gentleman, but they've knocked it down now and they're building an apartment block on it. So I just, what do you think happens to them entities?
It's interesting because I'm writing this book, as I think I mentioned, Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits, and I came across the story of Harry Martindale from York. Now, I remember hearing that story back on the old TV series called Nationwide back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I'd forgot all about it, and then somewhere I came across it, and I thought, "Wow, that's a good story. I think I'll have to research that and go deeper into it and analyze it." Now, just to give your audience a bit of a taster of that, because it kind of covers what you're discussing about buildings being knocked down, is that he was an apprentice plumber, and this would be about 1953, I think, if I'm correct in my memory. He was about 17, just got his first job as an apprentice plumber. And he was with a load of other plumbers and heating installation engineers, and they were basically revamping this 17th century manor house just on the outskirts of York. And I think it was called the Chancellor's House, if memory serves me correct. And it was owned by the National Trust or something like that. And so it was all kind of being modernized and updated. And his task at the time was to go down into the basement cellar and drill some holes in the wall and pull some pipes through. And he'd done it the first day, and he had found a trench bit that had been dug into the basement cellar. But unbeknown to Harry, because he was, he wasn't sort of worldly at that time, I suppose, this trench had been dug by some archaeologists. And what they found is that they found what was possibly a Roman remains or a Roman road in this trench, and basically this 17th century house had been built somewhere over this Roman road that had been there like for 2,000 years or something. And these archaeologists had found it, and so they were going to come back to it at some point and carry on doing their excavations. Now, Harry didn't know what this was. He just saw it as a big hole in the ground in the basement. So he thought, oh, that's a really handy place to secure my ladder, so it won't slip away, sort of thing. So he stuck his ladder in the trench, climbed up the ladder and was drilling holes all day and things like that. And on the second day, he was still working away. He'd been there about 5 hours. And he said he started to hear what he thought was music coming from somewhere, but not fairy music, as we discussed in part 1. But he said it sounded like one particular note. And he thought, God, that's an awful tune on the radio he could hear. He thought it was the radio upstairs in the main part of the building. It was just like that. And he thought, what a weird bloody noise that is. But he said it got louder and louder and louder. And it got to the point where it got so louder that suddenly below him, because remember, he's about 10 foot off the ground, with a hammer or drill or whatever, working with his tool. Below him, he said he suddenly saw these Roman centurion soldiers and other soldiers walk under him, and one came through on a horse, and he was so startled that he literally walked out the wall, and he was absolutely flabbergasted, and he was so shocked that he unstable, and he fell off his ladder onto the ground, and he got scared, so he ran into the corner of the cellar to try to hide from them. But he said he could only see them from the knees upwards. But he said it's interesting that when they got to this trench that had been dug by the archaeologists, did the rest of their legs appear, you see? And he said he could see their faces. They were unshaven and they were covered in mud, so they weren't clean. And it's like as if they'd been walking for days. And he said they looked really sort of unkempt. They weren't all tidy. But the interesting thing about it is that also he said that as well as the horse, he said he described them as having green tunics and small round shields and small daggers. And that's not the typical way when you watch a Hollywood movie with Charlton Heston or something, or Gladiator, these normally they're having red tunics, great big rectangular shields, and great big long Roman swords. These weren't typical Romans, and this is how he described them. And it wasn't until like the 1990s when some historians looked into this, they actually investigated it and found that around sort of 2,000 years ago in York, the main Roman Empire was becoming a bit more fragmented and dismantling itself. And so the main Romans had kind of left Britain, but they had left these auxiliary soldiers there, which were probably locals, or they might have been Italians or Romans, but they were like, we would think today as a territorial army. In our world, the TA, the auxiliary soldiers, the backup soldiers. So they wore a different uniform, and they found that they wore green tunics, they had small round shields and small daggers, which is exactly what Harry Martindale had seen. So what happened was he basically got so scared. Once they were the last to ironically come through this wall, and it was about 15 of them, was one of these people growing a great big kind of horn of something, which was the note he had heard playing initially. And what happened in historical times, the Romans would announce their return to the garrison by blowing the horn, saying, it's us, it's the Roman legion, open the gates, we're not enemy troops, it's us. And they blow that like that to announce their arrival, you see. And they were marching back into York, presumably. Now, he saw these ghosts. He said that they appeared to be talking in a language he didn't understand, but he said they completely ignored him. They did not even look at him, as if he wasn't there. They were acting out their own scenario in their own time frame. Now, he ran up the stairs, out of the cellar, and he said he saw the caretaker of the building, who said, oh, it's like you've seen them ghosts, my lad, or the Romans, my lad. He kind of knew of them, this caretaker, and he laughed. And poor Harry Martindale said he never went back to the job, and he left it. And basically, he told his friends in confidence in the pub, he says, don't tell anybody, but the reason I'm not going back to that job because I saw these ghosts. And they all laughed at him, but the word got round, and that's how he became known about it, Harry Martindale's Roman Ghosts of York. Now, about 7 or 8 years later, a different lady was running the place as a custodian, a caretaker of the place, and she had 2 dogs, and she was going around locking up all the rooms, checking up the rooms before she went to bed, and the dogs were barking at the top of this particular cellar. So she said she looked down into the cellar and she saw a load of Romans going through the cellar. But she said this time they were all on horses, but they were covered in mud. And she was seeing them like in 1957, in the February of 1957. So it's still winter, but in 1957. But they were caked in mud. But Harry Martindale had seen his in the November of 1953, but they were caked in mud. And this is what I'm coming to, is that she saw them again on another occasion, maybe a month later, and they were covered in mud. But this time they were walking, holding their horses, or no, they were not riding them, but they were laying on them as if they had all totally knackered. And they couldn't even be bothered to sit upright on the horses. They were like asleep on the horses, and the horses were leading them back to the garrison or something. So each story was different. It wasn't a repeat. It wasn't. A lot of people talk about the stone tape theory of ghosts kind of like being played on a loop, doing a certain repeat action. Now, what was happening, I go into my book about this. I believe that because and the key here is the mud, is that each time that they've seen them with the mud on them, but each time they've been spotted, it's been the winter of their year in 1957 or 1953. It's their winter as well. And so I believe that what they're doing is seeing them in, say, the winter of what it was 2,000 years ago. And obviously in those days, the roads were going to be muddy. There wasn't kind of concrete over the roads or tarmac or whatever. And so they were going to get splattered. And this is why I think it's winter, because they're getting splattered in mud. There's more rain and stuff like that. And in the summers of those times, it's so warm in those summers of 2,000 years ago, because again, I've researched it, that it's so warm you can actually grow grapes in the north of England around that time. So we know it was winter because they were covered in mud. And I think that what they were doing was seeing them like through a portal in time, a window in time. And somehow this building, back to buildings and constructions, was acting like a sort of a window or something through which they could view time. And these people were kind of bleeding into our time zone. I mean, I've heard spirit guides that, these spirit guides we mentioned earlier have talked about time, because they're very wise in that. They talk about time happens all at once. So the Roman times are happening now as we speak. But I think that, for instance, if it's we're February now, 2022, it's also February AD 520 or something, on this particular day. But it's also February 2000 BC or whatever. So if I see a ghost today through a portal of time, I'll see it on its equivalent day, like 2,000 years ago or something, in its own time zone. Hence the mud. Overlaid. So when you take the building away, as you mentioned, Andy, do those ghosts go away? I think they possibly do, because you're taking away the construction that allows them to be seen. So it's a bit like saying, when you take a TV out of a house, can you still see the television programs? No, you can't, because you've taken away the instrument that projects it, if you like. So I think that's what happens.
Right.
Yep. Cheers for that.
Next question. Space Cadet Lottie's asking, what is Neil's most strange account he's heard or experienced regarding the Fae?
Interesting. Thank you for that, Space Cadet Lottie. Well, some of the stories I mentioned earlier about the cutting the shadow away from the guy's feet was interesting. I did interview a lady last year on our Paranormal Peep show, and she told me an interesting story. She calls herself Kate Hairgirl. I've met her once, I think, at the group that I used to run. But she said that she was walking down this country lane, and she said she heard some noise in a hedgerow, and she was curious about what this noise was. Is it a wild animal, a fox, or something in the hedgerow? And she said she was curiously drawn to look into this hedgerow. And she said that she pulled the grass back or something like that to peer in the hedgerow. And this is what she said she saw. She said she saw a small man, but he had a mouse head on. So we're talking about half man, half beast. This appeared to be a man. She said he had checkered trousers on and like a little outfit, but he had a mouse head on. And
that is cute.
Sort of stayed there for a few seconds, then scurried away, I presume. So that was a really weird one. It sounds
Yeah.
totally unbelievable, but I'm only saying that is the most strangest one I've heard
Yeah.
today. Anyway,
I like that though.
Yeah, weird, isn't it? But
It
it was
is,
no
yeah.
threat to her. No
No.
evil threat. It wasn't spooky in that sense. She just saw it. She also said that she was on a flight too. She was coming back from Holland, I think, and she was looking out the window, and she said she saw what she called, for want of a better word, a sky serpent. She said she saw this thing moving around in the sky, and they're probably like 35,000 feet up, these planes travel at, and it appeared to be flying alongside the plane, but it looked like a snake, but with some sort of weird head on it. And she looked out the window at it, and she said she saw another passenger also looking out the window at it as well. So again, she wasn't hallucinating. Someone else saw it. I don't think she spoke to the passenger, but she could clearly see the other passenger was also looking at this thing, whatever it was. I'm not suggesting it was a fairy, but I've seen videos on YouTube of strange snake-like things in the sky. So I've also interviewed a guy called Nick Hayes who photographs things using the ultraviolet spectrum on his camera. He had to have his camera converted, and he aims it up in the sky above the roof of his house, and he's photographed weird shapes and things that you would not see with a human eye, but his cameras picked them up, and they appear to be creatures that are unseen by the human eye, that are flying in our sky, that they're just invisible to our frequency of perception.
Yeah. That makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? What's going on above us? I mean, I'm always looking at the sky.
Yeah,
but I mean, you can't walk along and look at the sky all the time. But if you can't see them anyway, it's just you don't know what's going on, do you?
Well, that's it. Yeah. He took his inspiration from a guy called Trevor James Constable, who was photographing at the time, because this was going back to the 1950s and 60s in the Mojave Desert, using infrared film or filters over his camera, and he was photographing strange blobs, weird shapes that are floating in the sky. Some people see UFOs and things like that. So maybe some of these UFO accounts, they're not craft, but they're literally strange critters in the sky. Whatever they may be.
I've heard of people seeing. I've seen one video on YouTube about machinery in the clouds. People see machinery up in the clouds. But like I say, I've only ever seen one video of that. But I found that interesting. It's like, what for? What's that there for?
Interesting. You mentioned clouds, and Trevor James Constable and Nick Hayes, and I think they got their inspiration from another guy. I can't remember it. They used a device called a cloud buster.
Yes.
Which it's like made out of tubes, and I think in Nick's case he found something in his garden, like an old drain pipe, plastic drain pipe. So it appears to be that you can construct this thing out of basic materials like a drain pipe. You aim it like a great big gun at the sky. And I don't quite know how it works, but he calls it cloud busting. I mean, there's even a Kate Bush video called
there is,
Cloud Busting, song about it, and it does something. And apparently, whatever it does, it draws these critters or whatever they are to the scene. They seem to be attracted to the action of whatever it does, and then he can get his photograph. So it's like a lollipop, if you like,
Yeah, a carrot on a stick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Really weird though.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, never heard of that before, but I have to try and build one over the weekend. I
think it might make clouds rain. That's what I think happens. So maybe don't build a big one.
No,
certainly not over lazy, don't mind.
Got enough rain. Right. Next question from Patricia Adams Wright. Do you have a favourite set of tarot cards?
No, I don't actually. I'm not really into the tarot these days. I've actually done a little bit of artwork for Doreen Virtue, who was for a time one of the top people selling stuff on Hay House, but now she's gone to the other side. She's become a Christian, and she's denounced all her new agey stuff and says,
I've got a few of her decks. I better keep hold of them then, haven't I?
Yeah. Well, she had contacted me a number of years ago because she had seen one of my paintings, which was Artemis, the goddess Artemis, and she said, could I use that in my goddess oracle card set?
Yeah, that's what I've got.
So if anyone's ever got if you look up at Artemis, it's actually my ex-wife posing for me. She's got a bow and arrow against a red sky. That is a painting I did a number of years ago. 4,
Right.
I did it for an organisation called the Children of Artemis, which is a witchcraft and Wicca organisation. That's how that came about. But she had seen it on the internet and basically contacted me and says, could I use this picture? And I got paid for it. So I suppose in a sense I have a fondness for those tarot cards, if you like, or oracle cards, because I did the work on it. But other people have come up to me and looked at my artwork and said, oh, have you ever thought of doing a tarot card pack? And I considered it briefly, but I did meet an artist a number of years ago, a lot of work, who spent something like 5 years of their life trying to produce all this artwork. And I looked at it, and the original painting started off great, but as the work went on, the quality got worse and worse because they're trying to hurry it up and they're rushing through it. And I would rather not be put under that kind of massive project like that. Yeah. I don't mind contributing the odd artwork for a project like the Doreen Virtue thing, but I like to move on to different things because it keeps the artwork turning over. It looks exciting and interesting. But as I have used in the past, I think when I was doing tarot cards, I was using the same deck of cards, and I think it might have been called the Witch's Tarot, but I can't remember now. It was the same deck of cards that was used by Roger Moore in Live and Let Die. Do you remember when it was the lady that was the tarot card reading that film?
The death card,
and it was the same card pack, and that was the card pack I used. So that's the one I'm familiar with. I wouldn't say it's my favorite because I don't really look at tarot cards now, hardly at all, but they're ones I'm familiar with. So it's not the straightest answer I can give.
if you did the artwork from, that's like 72 cards you've got to do. And like you say, that's you sort of get to the 10th one and you nowhere near the end, are you? And it's just going to consume all your time.
A
lot of work. So. Right, next question from Blue Shift. Question for Neil: can anyone learn mediumship, or is it a gift?
I think largely it is a gift, in the same way that some people can sing quite naturally. But we've all got vocal cords, so that means you can sing. You can sing to a certain extent. You know, you can be taught how to sing, but I would say that you wouldn't be as naturally as good as, say, the person that's naturally good at singing. They've just got that knack. And it's like drawing. I can draw and paint, and I can teach other people how to do certain techniques and things, and they can get results from it. But somehow I've just got that natural ability that I was born with, that I seem to know how to do it, or had the ability to do it naturally. So, I think that you can naturally be a medium. Like in the case of 1 in 300,000, as it was with Ross Bartlett, the guy that I mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah.
But equally, he could teach you what he knows, and some of you might have greater success than others. And I would say that if you're interested in that sort of thing, by all means, go along to any workshops and that and try and learn it. And I think that you'll find out whether you're any good or not. Maybe after, if you go to a regular developing circle, you'll find out whether you're any good or not. Maybe within the first month. If you go on a regular basis, the key to it is to keep going and practicing. Some people naturally see ghosts and spirits all the time. I never see any spirit or ghost, which is weird, but I do feel them around, and I've just got that ability to feel them. I can see their thoughts or feel their thoughts. I can feel them come into me sometimes, but I just can't see them.
Clairsentient, I think.
Yeah, there's the different clairs. There's clairaudience, which is the hearing. Clairvoyance, voyance like voyeurism, is to see or watch. So that's where you see the pictures. Clairsentience is where you can feel things. There's another one, I forget what it is, but it was where you smell things. I mean, a lot of mediums will kind of have all of these different abilities, these senses. I mean, I've smelt beer in a reading, and it turned out the guy I was doing a reading for, the guy that had passed on, he was quite an avid drinker. And so he was bringing that smell of beer through to me. I was absolutely convinced that there was a barbecue going on in the garden next door, because I could smell beer so strongly. And they said, well, no, the windows are shut and there's no barbecue next door. But I thought, where's that smell of beer coming from? And they said, no, it's you picking it up. I doubted that it was, clairsentience or whatever it was, but I really did think I was smelling beer. But it turned out the guy that I was bringing back was an avid drinker. And he was also showing me these cowboy boots that he used to wear. And the woman said,
Right.
yeah, I can take the cowboy boots. And they came in handy, apparently, because this guy would go to France, get all his booze, declare it at customs as he came back off the ferry, but he would sneak a couple of bottles of whiskey down these boots and not declare them.
Yeah.
And this is what he was trying to tell, you see, so that he was bringing the attention to the
yeah.
boots sort of as a kind of humorous joke to say, do you remember this kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Good. Right. Next question. As someone who doesn't seem to be sensitive, I wondered if a psychic contacted a loved one for you, could disturbing them have any negative effect on them in any way, given I've never sensed them?
So let me understand this. If going to a psychic and they pick up your loved one on the other side, you're considering that you're disturbing them in the afterlife, and it upsets them in some way, because you've never picked them up. No, I don't think that's true. It's an equivalent to like picking up a telephone, I suppose. You know, you want to contact someone, you ring them up or you send them an email. I don't think it's necessarily going to have a negative effect on them. It can have actually a positive effect. If you think of it this way, if you think that you're the person that's died, you discover that you're still alive, the first thing you want to do is, but you know, you see all your relatives like upset, crying or whatever because you've passed over, but you're thinking, but I'm not dead. Now, I'll highlight a case here. Many years ago, before I was married, it was my then fiance. We'd gone to this. Her grandfather had died, and a year after his death, we'd gone to his graveside as like the anniversary of his death, and we put some flowers there. Now, she was naturally crying, obviously, because it was her grandfather. And she was upset. And then we got back in the car and she had a bottle of water and she drank the water. And, you know, she stopped crying after that and she was okay. But about a week later, we went to a medium in a spiritualist church, and we were sitting at the back. But this medium just pointed us out. And he said, you there with the long brown hair, which was my ex-wife. He said, I've got your grandfather here, and he wants to tell you that he's not in the ground. This is what you said. He's not in the ground. Don't think of him in the ground. He said, you had a little cry, but he said, and after that, he said, you had a drink of water, and then you felt a lot better, didn't you? And it's exactly as it happened, you know. And again, cold reading, no way was this cold reading. But what he was trying to stress was that he had got the opportunity to say, don't think of him as that corpse in the ground. Think of him as alive, because he was. And he was trying to stress that in the reading. And so that when you pass over, you're in a similar kind of scenario, is that you know you're alive on the other side. The first thing you want to do is go and cheer your relatives up and say, I'm alive, I'm fine, I'm okay.
Don't worry about
you can't always get through to you can't always get through to them. So in a sense, even if sometimes through grief and emotions, they can't get a message through because it acts as a barrier. And so sometimes you may not hear from a relative in a dream or a presence or something until some of that grief has died away and they can actually come through. I mean, it's been known that people have actually come through mediums literally within hours of dying, and they've reported, you know, that they're okay and things. But most commonly, people won't return maybe till a few months after, because remember, after they've passed, they've got to settle down in their world wherever they've gone. They've got to get used to how things work over there. They don't have this sudden absolute super ability to go, I can go and contact you, you, and you. They've got to learn the ropes. And remember, the guy I mentioned at the beginning had to have the Native American bring him back through the airing cupboard. That was probably a year later or something, or 6 months later, I think I said, you know, and he was using someone to come and bring him back. So the wife wasn't sure how to make contact. She wasn't even sure that she was making contact, but it was coming to her. She didn't go seeking a medium. It was actually coming to her, which is interesting. So I think that you're not disturbing them if you get a reading from a medium, they bring back, you know, your loved one and they give you information. You're not disturbing them. Remember, a lot of people think that you shouldn't raise the dead or you're disturbing the dead. They think that there's this false belief that they're asleep somewhere, and it's an old Christian that you're asleep in the ground until Judgment Day and you're risen up, but you're not asleep. You know, I'm not saying they don't sleep. They actually do have naps over there, from what I've read. They do have the little afternoon nap, like we all do.
It's
true. It's true. And it's true, because a lot of mediums have reported that when so-and-so passed over, they might have actually died in their sleep on this side, but then they wake up on that side. So technically they're still asleep to wake up, if you see what I mean. So they do sleep, you see, over there. But they still do have the little afternoon naps. I say afternoon naps in quotes because that's the way we kind of view it. But there's no night or day over there or something, I understand. But so don't worry about disturbing them. They're not in the ground. They're not asleep in the way that you're being told by the Christian churches or whatever. They're actually alive and well, and they're just on a different sense of reality, a different channel of perception. That's all.
Yes.
That's all. So you're not disturbing them at all. In fact, I think they'd be quite pleased to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent.
Paul Tucker's asking, do you see sparks, auras before or after seeing spirits? I used to when I was younger, pre-teen, and as I've got older, I tend to only see a person in my dreams, which are rare with it now, but not in reality.
Interesting question. Thanks for that, Paul. As I mentioned, I don't see anything at all. I don't see spirits or anything like that myself. But I know people that have. I've got a very good friend called Philip Kinsella. He's a medium.
Yes.
And he made a pact with a friend that was dying. I think I forget what his name was. Yeah, he made a pact with his friend that was dying of cancer. He was only 20 years old. And he said, would you come back to me? Yes. And because this guy read one of Philip's manuscripts, he understood where Philip was coming from. He goes, well, how shall I come back? And he says, well, I don't know. So this guy, he said, Gareth, I think his name was. He said, I'll come back like in Star Trek. I'll beam down, if you like. I'll try to anyway. So anyway, Philip had come home one night and it was winter and he had gone in the kitchen and they had the conservatory there. And he said that he suddenly saw, and this was dark. Obviously, it was the darkness of the winter that made it happen, I think. He suddenly saw someone through, he thought it was an intruder in the garden.
Yeah.
And he said that he saw this man. And he thought, who's that out there? How could they get in? The gate's locked and everything. There's an intruder. But he realised when he looked at it, he had a baseball cap on, the shirt. He realised it was his deceased friend, Gareth. Yeah. And his friend kind of had a smile on his face to say, yeah, it's me. Then he just vanished, but with all these sparks, with the kind of weird sparks. Right. And these sparks have been seen by other people. There's a guy that I met who said that he come home one day. And again, he thought he had an intruder in his hallway. He opened the door, his family was with him, and he saw a man stand there. So instinctively, he put his hand up saying, stay there. But then he suddenly saw these sparks round this man, and the man just faded away. Now, he thought, bloody hell, I've seen a spirit or something. Now, it turned out that this guy did this Ouija board session professionally. And a week later, when clients came to go on this spirit board, the spirit that came through said, I am sorry that I scared you, Andy, but I wanted to check you out to see what you like before I came through this. So he had appeared to this guy, and that's what he saw. He saw the sparks and everything. So it seems to be some sort of byproduct of not all spirits. I can't say it's, it's a thing across but a general rule of thumb is that sometimes you might see an aurora or these sparks bouncing off the spirits. It's almost as if they're kind of interacting with our reality in some way, shape, or form, and it's a byproduct of their manifestation. These sparks or something.
Right.
Don't know what it is exactly, but it's some sort of energy. Some sort of energy.
There's something.
Yeah. There's something going on there. Yeah.
Right. Next question is from last week's guest, Mr. Professor Tim Brennan. Have you had any really dark experiences with the paranormal?
Interesting question. Thank you for that, Tim. No, I haven't. I mean, we talked about Ouija boards just then. I actually went with this guy called Andy to use the Ouija board professionally and his friend. And, Ouija boards always have this negative connotation. But I can only say I had a really, really great experience. My mum came through clear as anything. It was like I was getting texts from the spirit world. And I truly believed it to be my mum. People say, oh, it's spirits masquerading and things like that. It's all these people that say this, especially Christians saying, oh, I know you think you're doing good and things like that, but it's always spirits masquerading these things. So you say, well, okay, talk from your experience. When was the last time you went to a seance? Tell me. And they never have. So they can't really talk from experience, So I was talking from experience, and I've done the research and everything, and this was a really positive experience. And I put all these questions to her, and she answered them all correctly.
Yeah.
And she even interrupted my chat to suddenly throw things back at me in this seance.
Really?
Like for instance, I'll give an example. First of all, I'll tell you some interesting side bits to that. Is that this was the second session I'd had with this spirit board, and I thought, right, I'm really prepared this time to ask some testing questions. And I said, Mum, what was it you did on a drawing board many, many years ago? Basically, we had an old fireplace back in the 70s, and to stop the draft coming down the fireplace, we used to put this bit of hardboard in front of it to stop the draft coming down it.
Like
I think everybody did that.
Yeah. And but she decided, because as I said, I grew up on Star Trek. My mum loved Star Trek. She had a bit of a thing for Mr. Spock. She took this hardboard in the summer, because we didn't need it obviously in the summer, in front of the fireplace. So she actually got a felt tip pen and drew Mr. Spock on this piece of board. And we was all amazed at how well she drew it. Because we didn't consider my mum to be the artist. It was my dad that was the artist that we got my artistic skills from. But she did a really good drawing of Mr. Spock. And anyway, we didn't have paper in them days. We didn't have reams of paper drawing, no sketchbooks. We just drew on anything we could find, old envelopes or newspaper. Wallpaper. And she drew it on this board. And anyway, she put it back on come winter, this board went back in front of the fireplace, and we forgot all about the drawing because it was facing and stuff like that. And then years later, it was boarded up or whatever permanently. I don't know whatever happened to the board. But I always remembered this Star Trek Mr. Spock on there. So I said through, when I was at this session, Mum, who was it you drew on this board? Now, it was interesting because she didn't know whether to say the character name or the actor's name. And the glass went around and she wasn't sure which to say, especially when you give them two possibilities of two answers. It throws them a bit. So I said, okay, give me the actor's name, not the character name. And so she just spelled out the name Leonard for Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock in Star Trek, you see? Yeah. So I said, that's absolutely spot on. And then one of the other questions I asked, I said, where have I just been recently? Now, I always say Orkney because I go and visit my kids in Orkney. But my mum always used to say Orkney Islands. And so she spelled out Orkney Islands. Yeah. And I would never put the words islands because I know they're islands, you see? Yeah. But she always said Orkney Islands. And the two people that are running this session had never heard of the Orkney Islands. She said, well, where's that then? So it shows that they're not pushing the glass either. Yeah. So, and so I said, who did I go and see up there? And so she spelled out the word daughter. Yeah. And so the lady, she said, well, what's the name of Neil's daughter? And so she spelled out Morgan, which we'd mentioned earlier in the other reading that had come through the other medium. Then she suddenly broke away from answering questions just to say, I like her boyfriend, which was the Chris Hayes we'd mentioned in the early thing. Her boyfriend was Chris Hayes. I like her boyfriend, she said, which I wasn't expecting. So it shows it wasn't me moving the glass. And it really whizzed round. I like her boyfriend. And so that reminded me of an interesting, funny scenario, which I said, oh, yes. And I said, when you first met him, you got his name wrong, didn't you? And she went, yes. So it became a bit of a funny family joke as the first time I introduced Chris to my mum, and I sort of pre-warned my mum. I said, Morgan's boyfriend's going to come and see you today. His name's Chris, okay? And she goes, yeah, okay. So he came in the living room, like maybe 3 or 4 hours later. I brought him there. I said, here's Morgan's boyfriend. And she said, lovely to meet you, Stuart. And I said, Stuart? I said, his name's not Stuart. Where'd you get Stuart from? I said, his name's Chris. So it always become a bit of a funny joke. Yeah. So I said in this session, I said, yeah, and what did you call him when you first met him? And she spelled out Stuart. I said, I said, you got his name wrong. You embarrassed the poor boy. And then she wrote back, and this was typical of the things she would say physically. She wrote back, was funny. And she always say that, that was funny. Yeah. So she had a sense of humor. It was absolutely a personality coming through, and everything was coming through. It was like texting getting a text message from the spirit world. So in answer to the question, no, I've never met anything dark or demonic or evil or whatever. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's like in my own earthly life, I've never met anyone so evil. For instance, I know, in prison, there's murderers like Peter Sutcliffe or Dennis Nielsen and Myra Hindley. They're probably what we classify as evil people. So I'm not denying that those people don't exist. I've just never personally met them. And so in this sort of contact with the spirit world, I think that 90% of the time you're going to be in contact with your loved ones, I think.
I think that's actually answered Joe's comment question there. I'd like to know if there's an afterlife. I think.
I can actually confidently say, Joe, there is an afterlife, and I don't want to say there is one afterlife, but I think there's many afterlives. In the same way, using an analogy, we've got many countries of the world. You go to different countries and find different facets of life, different way people do things, different environments, different trees, and things like that. That in the spirit world, and it says this in the Bible, but I'm not an actual Bible thumper person like that. But he said, Jesus said, in my Father's kingdom, there are many mansions, and spiritualists interpret that to say there's many worlds. And scientists actually talk of saying there's, depending on which scientist you listen to, of course, but there's scientists say there's 11 dimensions beyond this one. So if you took that scenario, you could say, well, maybe those dimensions, or in some of the dimensions, there are the spirit world. But from my reading of the spirit world, there's different regions or different levels of the spirit world, and there's a place that they call the lower earth, the lower realms, for people that could be like the evil people that they go to when they die, because that's their level of evolution, if you like. But for the average person, we go to what they regard as the summer lands, and it's continually summer, which comes to an interesting point that I discuss in my book, is that many people that come from the spirit world and describe the conditions over there, they don't remember seeing a sun. And yet it always seems to be bright over there, but there's never a sun there, which is interesting. And then it makes me wonder, if there's no sun, would that mean there's no shadows? Because a sun casts the shadows from its direction of where it is. If you think of a sundial works principally on the idea of a shadow moving from the sun, does that also mean then that those people that are stealing that guy's shadow in the first part of the talk, they come from the spirit world or somewhere that doesn't have shadows? And so this is why they want to get shadows to put in their shadow box or whatever they want, you know? Like, connecting the dots a little bit. Just hypothetically speaking, I don't know. But just an interesting point.
Makes you wonder, though.
Right, next question from Loki. What do you think of other forms of divination, e.g., crystal balls, pendulums, tea leaves, etc.?
I would imagine tea leaves are a dying art now because we've all got tea bags. But a friend of mine, I used to call him Mystic Matt because he was quite into doing readings. He actually used to do, when you could smoke in pubs and had ashtrays in there, he used to do what we call fag butt readings. I know that the Americans think fag means gay, but in Britain, fags was the old word that we used to use for cigarettes.
Yeah, it was,
So he used to do what he termed as fag butt readings. And basically, he used to give everyone's cigarettes, swizz them around an ashtray, tip the ashtray out onto the table, and then mess around with them and do a reading. Now, there was nothing magical to do with these cigarette butts. And it's in the same way that some guy, say, in Africa, might get a load of bones or something and throw them on the ground and do a reading from them. There's nothing magical in them. I think it's actually the more of the psychic intuition of the person. And I mentioned earlier that when I was doing tarot card readings, I think they do reach into your subconscious somehow, but it's your subconscious giving you those hunches, those thoughts, those ideas to then relate to the person. But they become a springboard. And in my case, it acts as a springboard into mediumship. I found that I started to receive messages from the afterlife as I was doing the reading, and even going into trance on some occasions. So, like a pendulum, we mentioned a pendulum in the question. That is a way of accessing the subconscious mind. You hold it, and I think it's the slight movement of your hand subconsciously will swing the pendulum. It's almost like acts as an antennae. It amplifies your own body movements to be read clearly,
Yeah.
So, you learn to sort of say, oh, that's a yes, and a swing that way is a no, and you can ask it questions. And I've read it's a good way of accessing your subconscious mind to kind of get maybe questions, not necessarily questions of the universe, but perhaps more questions about yourself, health and stuff like that, perhaps.
Yeah. Space Cadet Lot is asking, has Neil ever had an out-of-body experience?
Not frequently. I'm not a journeys out the body person. There was a guy called Robert Monroe who wrote a book called Journeys Out the Body, who actually discovered that he could actually go out of his body after listening to he was actually trying to teach himself languages by recording languages on tape and listening to them. Somehow it triggered him to go out of his body, and he learned to sort of go with it, if you like, and he learned to kind of control it. So he wrote this book called Journeys Out the Body, and in the book he gave specific instructions at the end of how to go out your body, the exercises to follow. But he said, once you've learned this, you can't unlearn it. It's like opening Pandora's box. You'll always happen to you. And my friend who told me about the book, he read it and he learned the instructions, and he said, I wish I didn't learn it. He says, I keep going out of my body now. He said that he went out of his body right up high above the earth. He saw it as a round earth. I'm not talking flat earth here. He saw it as a round earth. For those that want to question it, he saw it as a round earth. He went right up to space and came back down again. Now, I've had sensations where I've laid on the bed and I actually sort of felt myself kind of drifting a little bit. So I thought, oh, am I just hovering above my body maybe? So I kind of gave myself a mental suggestion saying, I will go to Steve, who I just said was the guy that lent me the book of Journeys Out of the Body. I want to go to Steve. Now, I suddenly found myself going through woodlands and grass and fields and things like that. And I felt I was rushing through, and I thought, well, this isn't the way to Steve's. So somehow I stopped it. But then I kind of thought about it afterwards. I thought, well, hang on a minute. The way I normally go to Steve's is in my car and I drive down the roads. But when you're out the body, you don't need a car. You don't need to go through the roads. You just go as the crow flies. So it made perfect sense to go through woods and things like that. So maybe I was, and I've had dreams where I've also, in the dream, you can fly. But I was trying to show someone that I could fly in the dream, but I couldn't fly above these cables that were actually attached to the house in the dream. Now, in the book Journeys Out the Body, they got Robert Monroe to do an experiment where they put him in a Faraday cage and said, can you get out of this Faraday cage out of your body? And a Faraday cage, when you switch it on, it generates an electrical field around it. And he found that he could not get out of the Faraday cage because they wanted him to go and like read a message on something down the corridor or something. And he just couldn't get out of it. And I actually wondered in the dream that perhaps I was having an out-of-body experience and I couldn't get above these electrical cables that were powering the house. And in actual reality, there was these overhead cables. You thought they were like telephone wires, but when I examined them later on closer examining, I realized, because it was in the countryside setting, these were actual power lines going to the house overhead. And so I wondered if I actually was trying to fly above the house, but I couldn't get above the house simply because this power line was acting like a Faraday cage, you see.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, because they say that's like a cord that's the connection between you and your spirit. So maybe you can't go through the electricity because it'll cut the cord, possibly.
Well, that brings me to an interesting story that happened. I was telling these stories to someone on their 50th birthday party. We all gathered around a campfire, and I told some of these stories. And this girl piped up and she said, well, look, I don't normally talk about this stuff, but I'll tell you as you're listening. She goes, and I believe it to be true because I know the doctor that it happened to. She says, I'm a nurse and I work in a hospital, and I think it's somewhere on the south coast. And she said that on this particular hospital floor was all these really ill patients on their like beds and things. They're all like life support machines and alarms and heart monitors and things like that. And she said that when someone flatlines, i.e. they're technically dying, according to the machine anyway, it automatically somehow pages the doctors on the next floor below. And so the doctors, rather than get in the lift and wait for the lift doors to shut and go slowly up, they find it quicker to run up 2 flights of stairs to there, and they can be there within seconds. And as they were running up these flight of stairs, I don't know if they were above the floor or below it, but anyway, they passed this girl that was a patient on the stairs, and she was sitting on the stairs in a hospital gown, but she was crouched over, and she was going, "I'm in pain. My stomach hurts. My stomach hurts." And they said, "What are you doing here?" And all she kept saying was, "My stomach hurts." And they said, "Well, look, stay here. We won't help you. We've got to go and help another patient, on the next floor. But we'll send someone to help you, okay?" And she didn't say any more. They ran upstairs, and when they went to go to the person that they had to try and revive on the hospital bed that had died, they saw it as the actual same girl that had passed on the stairwell.
Yeah.
And of course, they went back down there, and she was no longer there. And so I told my mum this story, and she goes, "But why would that girl be in pain then? If she's gone out of her body and died, why would she be in pain?" So I said, "Well," I said, "think of it like this. The doctors could see her, so she was still partly in this reality. These three medics, two medics and a doctor could see her. They could hear her talking. I think, as you suggested, the astral cord perhaps had snapped or broken.
Yeah.
And because she was still partly in this world, I think she was trapped in the box-like structure of the stairs. We talked about the seance cabinet, building up the energy it's containing it. I think her energy has partially temporarily trapped in this stairwell. That's why it floated there or something. And so therefore she was still feeling earthly sensations of pain. And so that's why I think the astral cord had broken, and to her it was sore or in pain. And maybe once she'd gone off into the spirit world, those earthly pains had died away. That's what I think, but I can't prove it, of course. But I thought it was a very interesting story that these doctors had seen this girl as a spirit. And it's not the first time, I understand, that doctors have seen spirits in hospitals. Because if you think about it, people going around graveyards looking for spirits, you don't really find them there. I think you find them more in hospitals because that's where people are dying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The first point of contact.
Yep.
Yeah.
Two more quick questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely, no problem.
This one's from Joe. So you believe in afterlife, death,
life
Neil?
after death?
Oh, how about if you're
death?
cremated? Does it make a difference?
None at all, Joe. None at all. Absolutely none at all. It's like saying, I mean, the analogy that spiritualists use, you're throwing off your old overcoat, which is the body.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of people that died, they came back through a medium. In fact, I'll reach over the book because I can see it here. I'll just show you this book because many of your listeners might be interested in getting this book. This is called, if I can hold it up to the camera there. Can you see that? Oh, no, hang on a bit.
Oh, it's gone invisible.
It's fading away. It's like a ghost. There we go. There it goes.
Voices in the Dark by Leslie Frost, is it?
No, Leslie Flint. Voices in the Dark by Leslie Flint. Yeah, there we go. If I hold it to my face.
Oh, yeah,
there we go.
Leslie
Flint. Voices in the Dark. Now, he was a trance medium, and he used to produce voice phenomena. So he never actually had mental mediumship as such. Is that he would sit in a cabinet or sometimes not sit in a cabinet, but generally in the darkened room, and these voices would manifest overhead. Not even through like a seance trumpet. They would just manifest in the room. In fact, in his younger years, he used to go to the cinema by himself and sit in the cinema, and people used to turn around saying, "Keep the noise back down there." But he said it wasn't him. He said all these spirit voices would be manifesting around him in the cinema, you see. Wow. They were trying to get through. They're obviously naughty because they got him for free.
Exactly.
But anyway, getting back to many of the voices that came back through Leslie Flint, and there's recordings on there. You can actually go to the Leslie Flint Trust on the internet and listen to recordings of voices recorded in the seance room of these people. A lot of people said that they were so glad to get rid of that old body. They're so free of it now. Because, I mean, if you think that a lot of people are old, when they die, they're in pain. They might have arthritis, crippled bodies, all sorts of cancers, things like so. And when they're released from that body, they're actually quite happy to get rid of it. They're absolutely shot of it. And so cremating it makes no difference whatsoever. That's the way that we deal with it. Because we're breaking down the material body. The body biologically will break down over time anyway. So it's no good trying to sort of think, oh, we must keep this biological human body preserved. For what reason? You know, unless you just want to examine it under a microscope or something, you know, medically speaking. Well, so just let it either naturally break down biologically in nature. I mean, remember, animals' bodies do the same. They biologically break down when they die. The spirit doesn't care two hoots about it because they've left it. It's like you know, as I said earlier, if you got rid of a coat, you gave it to a charity store or something, you know, do you really worry what's happened to that old overcoat? You know, it's not going to make any difference to the spirit.
No.
You know, so it makes no difference, in my opinion. I say it's my opinion that cremating a body has any problem with it. You know, you can have the ashes sitting on your urn, and you know, the spirits have said, you know, if it feels good for you to go and visit a grave and put flowers on it, that's for your benefit rather than theirs. You know, and if you want to sing hymns at a funeral and do that ritual of a funeral, that's for your benefit again. For you to come to terms with their passing, it makes no odds to them at all. So cremating a body doesn't really matter at all.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Second to last question. Paul Hadley's wanting to know, is the Robin theory as loved ones around real or not? Thank you. You know, when this obviously they say if a loved one's around, a Robin appears.
Robin theory. I don't think I'm familiar with that.
No, I think it's probably the way
you see a robin as a sign.
Butterflies or
right. Okay. So basically, if we just recap that, then if you see a robin, is your loved one appearing? Well, you could answer it in two ways. No, it's just a bird. That's a skeptic would say that. But I have heard that because the minds of birds can be controlled a little bit, that you could in a sense have a spirit that might be able to influence the bird in some way to go and visit you and maybe tap on the window. And maybe I have heard that from various sources. So it sounds crazy at first, but then I do remember reading, I'm a great follower of the Seth material by Jane Roberts. She was a medium in the 70s and 80s, and she used to channel this spirit guide, for want of a better word, called Seth.
Yeah.
And he said that although he's technically what you call in the spirit world, he never called it the spirit world, he would call it another plane of reality. He was quite more scientifically thinking. He said that he did merge his consciousness with that of a dog. So he would share his consciousness with the dog that was on Earth. So this dog would go around with its dog consciousness, but part of it would also be this Seth personality, so that he could experience life as a dog. And so the dog might have, you know, I mean, I don't know much about the dog. It was never traced or anything like that, but the dog might have been, say, quite a clever dog. Maybe it could do more tricks than the other dogs or something. I don't know. I'm just postulating ideas there. But he used to merge his consciousness with that dog until it died, you see. In the same way that, you know, a spirit will merge its consciousness with you to give you messages, I suppose. You know, so I suppose in a theory, you can merge your consciousness with a bird to influence it in some way, to go and knock on a window or sit on someone's hand or something like that. So if you feel it's your loved one coming as a spirit, fine, take it as that, you know.
With it.
That's possibly until you get to see a medium or something like that, that may be one particular way of them sort of getting a message through.
Yes, like that.
Thank you.
And finally, Space Cadet Lottie wants to know what your book's called, please.
Okay, well, there's a first book that we published in 2004 was Fairycraft, Faerie Crafty, Fairycraft. Maybe can I type it in here? And would it come up on the screen?
We can put the links. Andy will put the link up.
Right, if you send me the link, I'll add it onto the description.
All right. I believe it's out of print now, but you might be able to get it from some of these booksellers and Amazon second-hand copies and things like that. So it should still be available, Fairycraft. And that's working with fairies on a magical way. Now, the other book I am writing, so it's still not published. I'm sort of in the final chapters. Hopefully later this year, I will get around to finishing it. It's called Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits. Now, that might be through a publisher. We don't know yet, or it might be a self-published one. We'll see how we go. But I will, you know, at some point bring that out. And if you follow me on Facebook, you'll probably find out about it in due course whenever that happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Can I just check? I've just looked on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Is it this one by any chance?
Well, I can't see it on the screen. Yes,
it's getting
that's
close
the
to
one
that
with a
one.
blue
There you go.
purpley cover. Yes,
Yes.
interesting. There's a little story there. I must say about that cover. If you look on the back, don't read out the name of the designer, but you'll see it's by a lady. Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
It says cover design by. Yeah. Now, when we were coming up with designs, because remember it says illustrations by Neil Geddes Ward, right? Which is obviously me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were coming up with designs, we were allowed to have approval of the cover design, what the graphic designer was going to produce. And each cover that particular person came up with, we hated. We absolutely hated. Now, I had a dream around this time, maybe before even we got the book deal. I can't remember exactly when it was. But in the dream, I was drawing these pictures. And then I was handing all these drawings to this lady who was in a caravan with loads of kids. And she was getting felt tips and just colouring my drawings in and then getting loads of money for them, which seems a bit weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, then comes this book deal, and the graphic designer who was coming up with these awful covers, I considered, I said, look, do you mind if I have a go? So one of the drawings I'd drawn, which is the cover you see, was of the fairy with the hair blowing.
Yeah.
I'd drawn it out for one, and we used that on one of the pages. And I put these little ball designs of flowers all around it. And then I just drew the title above it, Fairy Craft, in some fancy writing. And I sent it to the publishing house over the weekend, and they got it on Monday. And they said, well, leave it with us and we'll see what we can do. And a week later, they popped that cover through as email, and they were praising the graphic designer, saying what a wonderful job she'd done designing it. And yet it was me that designed the whole bloody thing. And so in a sense, that was my dream, because all she had done was come up with the bluey purple colour, but I provided the drawing. So it's my dream coming true in a sense. She had coloured in my drawing, and instead, well, she was getting paid for it. She was getting all the praise for it. And so my dream came true.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's a lovely way to end tonight's live stream.
It is.
We'd just like to thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely brilliant. That 2 hours has just
Thank you.
flown
Thank
by.
you. Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
I'll be happy to come on. Someone's asking. Space
come back on,
He said,
A
come
few
back
of
on. So
us.
I'll be happy to come on and tell you some more stories at some point.
Yeah,
No
brilliant.
few
That'd be
people have
great.
actually come on. I've actually just smiled all the way through this.
Yeah, it's been.
Absolutely
I've
loved
loved it.
Honestly,
Every minute.
Yeah.
Cool.
So now
that'll be £1.
The check's in the post.
Thank you.
Now this is where Deb gets all confused and flustered. So what's happening next week, Deb?
Next week we're not on.
Yeah. Well, not yay, but yay. Yeah.
We're having a week.
I'm
off.
busy doing family stuff. But the next week,
Jay Austin. No,
No.
swapped. It's the
Not even-
Kinsella twins.
But what's before that? So we're doing the decode on the
yes.
Wednesday. So that's
Yes.
me, you, and Nathan. So
And then the
for those of
11th.
you, this is on the 11th. Wednesday the 11th. That's me, Deb, and Nathan. For those that don't know, Nathan is one of the guys that comes out investigating with me.
Yeah.
We actually work together. So there's him and his missus. He's going to come on. He's going to talk about himself, ask a few questions. You guys can ask him some questions as well. And then on the... Oh, that's the 11th.
Yeah, that's the 11th when you're doing Q&A with Nathan. Because I'm not here. I'm in Bridlington with BBR investigating.
Right. Sorry. On the 2nd, Wednesday the 2nd, not Wednesday the 11th. Forget all that I just said. So...
And it's me that forgets.
Is on the 2nd of March. That's me, Deb, and Nathan. So we'll just be chatting about what we've got, what's happened, and us going out investigating in the next... Well, we're going to start investigating in April.
Yes.
So we're going to be doing a lot of talking about that and the equipment that we're using to go out and do it. Then on the 11th...
I'm not here.
Deborah's not here, so it's just going to be me and Nathan. So that's going to be a Q&A. Ask anything you want, and more to Nathan than me, I think. And then the week after that is. Do you know? No.
Kinsella twins? No, Jay Austen. Oh, I don't know now.
No.
I looked in my diary earlier and you've mucked it all up now.
I've mucked everything up tonight. So,
Mr. Post-it note.
for the second, no, I've got a whiteboard now. It doesn't even work.
That's even worse.
So,
Walks past it and rubs it all off.
Forget the 11 for the second time. So the second is a decode. The fourth is Philip and Ronald Kinsella.
Yes.
The 11th is when Debs is away, and that's going to be me and Nathan.
Yes.
So nothing next week. The week after, the decode, and then the Kinsella twins.
Yes.
And then we'll go from there.
Nice time the Kinsella twins.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But Philip's
We've already had
been
Philip
on one.
Yeah. We've had Philip on, but we're having a pair of them on together.
I still have that story to tell him about that thing in Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've still not done that.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm going to send you a fairy story, Neil.
Please do. I'll be interested to see it.
My own personal fairy story.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's us done.
Yeah. So decode, the Kinsella twins. Debs isn't here, so it's me and Nathan. Then Stephen Myers, the guy who wrote the books on how the pyramids were built.
Yes.
He's got other stuff on there as well. And then the week after that, the 25th, is Jay Austen.
Yes.
And then the next one is going to be the 1st of April. And hopefully that's going to be our first investigation.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed it all goes well. Oh, got there in the end. Only messed it up 3 times.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
No. Right. So massive thank you. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, can I say, if anyone wants to see some of those stories again, I don't know if you're going to put this out on the internet or whatever, but they can also go to my YouTube channel, Neil Pill, NeilPeel, the Paranormal Peep Show. And there they can find episodes of the Paranormal Peep Show, which is Andy and myself interviewing guests like you're doing here. They might find those of interest, but also there's also presentations that I've done, like at Truth Seekers Northeast, where I've recorded myself doing the same sorts of talks and things like that. And if they want to re-watch some of them and see other stuff, feel free to have a look.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, if you send me the link, I'll add them in the description.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any links you want to share, just send them to Andy.
Yeah. I'll put them on as soon as you send them. It'll take me 2 minutes.
Yep.
So massive thank you. Yeah, massive thank you for Neil coming on tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to everyone in the chat.
And thank you to Joe for modding.
Yeah. And we'll see you on
whenever.
Week on Wednesday.
Friday, for God's sake.
Week on Wednesday.
Yeah, that's it.
Week on Wednesday. 2nd, 4th, and the 11th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see you then.
See you all then, and
good night.
Have a good weekend.
Yes.
See you all later.